Gabriel Ashworth, Duke of Weybourne, stood before a portrait in a darkened gallery at midnight, his face illuminated by a single candelabra. And the expression he wore was one Eliza Harding would have painted if she had been there to see it. Unguarded, devastated, and entirely his own. The portrait before him showed a man who looked warm, a man whose eyes held tenderness instead of arrangement, whose hands rested open instead of gripped closed, and the man standing in the shadows looked at that painted face as though it were a stranger he had once known and then forgotten. 31 hours earlier, he had told her he needed a week to forget her, a week to unsee what she had put on canvas, in a week to restore the performance his father had demanded 13 years ago when his brother died, and warmth became something Gabriel was no longer permitted to claim. But the portrait would not let him forget, and neither would the memory of her hands on his jaw, tilting his face into the light, telling him that the warmth was not something he did, but something he stopped preventing. The audience does not yet understand what they are witnessing. They do not know that the cold man and the warm portrait are the same person, that the expression on Gabriel's face is not grief or surrender, but recognition, the first honest look he's given himself since he was 19 years old. But they will. The first sitting began with a lie. Eliza Harding arrived at Weybourne Hall on a September morning when the light was sharp and golden, carrying her father's wooden case of brushes and a carefully folded canvas that had cost her 3 nights of sleep and the last of her credit with Mr. Pemberton in London. She was 26 years old, a portrait painter living in a rented cottage in Hartwell Village, and the commission she had accepted, a full-length portrait of the Duke of Weybourne for 40 guineas, could save her career or destroy it, depending entirely on whether the man would sit still long enough for her to see his face. The housekeeper led her through corridors lined with portraits of men who all looked the same, arranged, cold, their mouths held in the precise configuration of duty without warmth. Eliza studied them as she walked, noting the repetition of posture, the identical tilt of chin that suggested 6 generations of Ashworths had been painted by men who believed a duke's face was a station, not a person. The studio was on the 2nd floor, north-facing, with windows that let in the kind of light Eliza had spent her entire life chasing. Her father had taught her to read light the way other children learned to read books, by observation, by patience, by the slow accumulation of truth that only sustained attention could reveal. Gabriel Ashworth entered the room at precisely 10 o'clock, and Eliza saw immediately that he was a man who had been performing his face for so long he no longer knew what it looked like when it rested. She set her case on the table. "Your Grace, please sit." "I do not sit well," he replied, his voice carrying the precise cadence of a man who had spent years in Parliament, arranging words the way he arranged his posture. "You do not need to sit well," Eliza said, gesturing to the chair she had positioned near the window. "You need to sit still." He paused. "I do not do that either." "Then we have a problem," she said, meeting his gaze directly. "Because I cannot paint a man who is in motion, and you cannot fulfill your mother's wish if you will not hold still for an hour." Something shifted in his face at the mention of his mother. A crack, repaired in half a second, so quick that a lesser observer would have missed it entirely. But Eliza had been trained by a man who believed that truth lived in the 9 seconds between a subject's awareness and their recovery. She had seen the crack clearly. "1 hour," she said, was her voice gentler now. "And I will need you to stop doing what you were doing with your face." Gabriel's eyebrows rose slightly. "What am I doing with my face?" She met his eyes. "Performing it." 4 seconds of silence followed. Gabriel's jaw tightened, then released. He crossed the room and sat in the chair, his posture rigid, his hands gripping the armrests as though he were awaiting sentence. Eliza picked up a piece of charcoal and began to sketch. For the first 46 minutes, Gabriel Ashworth sat like a man carved from stone. His shoulders were squared, his chin elevated to the precise angle that every Ashworth portrait in the corridor had captured. His hands remained locked on the armrests, his knuckles white with tension. Eliza worked in silence, marking the broad structure of his face, the line of his jaw, the architecture of bone and muscle that would form the foundation of the portrait. At minute 47, the door opened. A child appeared in the doorway, 7 years old, barefoot, with dark hair that fell in tangles around her shoulders. She did not speak. She simply stood there, her gaze fixed on the palette of colors Eliza had arranged on the work table. Gabriel's voice carried a warning that was not quite anger. "Rose." The child did not move. Her eyes remained on the pigments: cobalt, cerulean, burnt umber, the raw materials that would become color once mixed with oil and applied to canvas. Eliza glanced at Gabriel and saw that his face had changed. The arrangement had dissolved. His jaw had softened. His mouth had lost the precise configuration it had held for 47 minutes. And in its place was an expression Eliza recognized immediately. Unperformed tenderness. The kind that could not be faked or sustained. The kind that arrived only when a person forgot they were being watched. 9 seconds. That was how long it lasted. Then Gabriel's awareness returned, his posture corrected, and the warmth disappeared as though it had never existed. But Eliza had seen it, and she had marked it in charcoal. 9 seconds of truth that would become the foundation of everything that followed. Gabriel spoke again, his voice now carefully neutral. "Rose, you should return to the nursery." The child's gaze remained on the pigments. "May I watch?" Eliza set down her charcoal and crossed to the work table. She picked up a palette knife and a scrap of linen, then held them out to the child. "You may mix cerulean. It is the most difficult color to prepare correctly, and I need someone with steady hands." Rose took the palette knife with the solemnity of a child receiving a great responsibility. She approached the work table, dipped the knife into the jar of powdered cerulean, and began to mix it with oil in careful, deliberate strokes. Gabriel watched her, and his face did the thing again. The softening, the arrival of warmth that he could not prevent when his attention was elsewhere. Eliza returned to her easel and sketched quickly, capturing the angle of his jaw, the way his mouth rested instead of arranged, the hands that had finally released their grip on the armrests. When the hour ended, Rose held up her fingers, stained blue with cerulean. Her voice was serious. "Miss Harding, cerulean is the color of the sky when it is trying to decide if it is happy or sad." Eliza looked at Gabriel, who was putting on his coat, his face once again arranged into the expression he wore for the world. She spoke quietly. "Yes, it is exactly that." The sittings deepened over the next 10 days. Gabriel arrived punctually for each session, 10 o'clock on Tuesdays and Thursdays, 1 hour precisely, never a minute longer. He sat in the chair by the window, his posture correct, his hands gripping the armrests, and Eliza watched his face until it told the truth. During the second sitting, she worked in the background, but Gabriel came anyway. He stood by the work table and watched her grind cobalt, pestle moving in slow circles against the mortar, the raw mineral becoming powder that would eventually become color. He spoke without prompting. "Your father was a painter?" Eliza glanced up, surprised. "My father was the best portrait painter in 3 counties. He died before anyone noticed." "And you learned from him?" "I learned to see," Eliza said, setting down the pestle. "What I do with what I see, that has been my failing, not his." Gabriel's gaze moved to the half-finished canvas on the easel. "You see more than most." She replied, "I see what is there. Most painters see what they expect or what they are paid to see. My father taught me that the two are not the same." During the third sitting, Eliza adjusted Gabriel's posture. She crossed the room and placed her hand on his shoulder, her fingers finding the place where tension gathered at the base of his neck. "You hold everything here," she said, pressing gently. Gabriel exhaled, an involuntary sound, as though her touch had released something he had been containing. Eliza removed her hand, but the warmth of the contact remained, a ghost of pressure that neither of them acknowledged aloud. During the fifth sitting, Eliza held a palette knife beside Gabriel's face, comparing the mixed color to the tone of his skin in the northern light. Her free hand rose to cup his jaw, tilting his head slightly to catch the angle she needed. Gabriel's hand lifted and covered hers, pressing the painter's hand against his face. 10 seconds passed. Neither of them moved. Eliza's thumb rested against his cheekbone, and she could feel the tension in his jaw, the way he was holding his breath as though movement would break something fragile. Then he released her hand, and she stepped back. Frau, and the sitting continued as though nothing had happened. But something had happened. They both knew it. On the 6th night, Eliza could not sleep. She took her sketchbook and a piece of charcoal and walked to the garden folly, a small stone structure at the edge of the Weybourne estate, half hidden by overgrown hedges and climbing roses. The moon was full, and the light was silver and cold. And when Eliza arrived, she saw Gabriel standing at the folly's edge, looking out over the darkened fields. He did not see her. She stayed in the shadows and sketched him, unguarded, unperformed, his face holding the expression he wore when no one was watching. The sketch took 20 minutes, and when it was finished, Eliza folded it carefully and returned to her cottage without making a sound. The next morning, during the 6th sitting, Rose appeared again. She had become a regular presence in the studio, mixing pigments on the floor while Eliza worked. Gabriel no longer sent her away. He watched her with the same unguarded tenderness Eliza had captured at minute 47 of the first sitting, and Eliza understood that the warmth was not a performance. It was what remained when the performance stopped. Rose looked up from the cerulean she was mixing. "Uncle Gabriel, why does Miss Harding's painting make you look like the man you are when you read to me at bedtime?" The room stopped. Gabriel's face went very still. He spoke carefully. "I do not read to you at bedtime, Rose." "You have," Rose said, her voice matter of fact. "3 times. When Mrs. Lennox fell asleep and you came to check the nursery. You read from the book Miss Harding left, the one with the pictures of birds. You did the voices." Gabriel's hand rose toward Rose's shoulder, then stopped. The gesture hovered in the air, incomplete, a reach toward a child he wanted to touch, but had been told not to warm. His fingers trembled slightly. Then he lowered his hand and placed it back on the armrest. Eliza watched. She did not sketch this moment. She memorized it instead, because some things were too honest for charcoal, too raw to be captured on paper. This was a man who loved a child, and had been taught that love was something he was no longer permitted to show. Gabriel spoke quietly. "I did not know you were awake." Rose's reply was simple. "I was pretending, so you wouldn't stop." Eliza turned back to her canvas and added a stroke of cerulean to the background, the color of the sky when it was trying to decide if it was happy or sad. Her hands were steady, but her chest was tight, and she understood now what she was painting. Not a duke, not a station. A man who had been told that warmth belonged to someone else, and who had spent 13 years believing it. 3 weeks into the commission, Eliza invited Gabriel to see the portrait's progress. He arrived at the studio alone, without Rose, and Eliza led him to the easel where the canvas stood, half finished. The face was complete, every detail rendered with the precision her father had taught her. The body was blocked in, the posture sketched but not yet painted, and the background held only the suggestion of the Weybourne library, not the room Gabriel's mother had requested as the setting. Gabriel stood before the canvas and looked at his own face. The man in the portrait looked warm. His eyes held the tenderness Eliza had seen at minute 47, sustained and permanent. No longer a fleeting moment, but a fundamental condition. His mouth sat differently, relaxed, as though the face had forgotten it was supposed to perform. His hands, sketched but not yet painted, were open instead of gripped. His voice was quiet. "That is not me." Eliza stepped beside him, her gaze moving between the man and the portrait. "That is exactly you. That is you at minute 47 of every sitting, when you forget I am watching and your face does what it wants instead of what you tell it to do." "The man in that portrait looks like my brother?" Gabriel said, his voice fracturing on the last word. "The man in that portrait looks like you," Eliza said. "If he also looks like your brother, that is because you share blood, not because you stole something that was never yours to take." Gabriel turned to face her, and for the first time since the sittings began, his face was not arranged. It was broken open, and Eliza could see the wound underneath. 13 years old, still bleeding, never healed. "My brother Thomas was the heir," Gabriel said. "He was warm, he was easy. Everyone loved him. When he died, my father took me into his study and told me that Thomas would have been the great duke, and I would have to be the correct one. He said the warmth was Thomas's inheritance, and the duty was mine. He said I could not be both." Eliza's hands curled into fists at her sides. Your father was wrong." "My father was the 6th Duke of Weybourne," Gabriel said. "He knew what the gallery required. He knew what the family needed. And he knew I was not the son who should have survived." "Your father told you a lie to manage his own grief," Eliza said, her voice steady and certain. "And you have been performing that lie for 13 years. But the warmth in that portrait is not your brother's. It is yours." I painted what I saw, and what I saw was a man who reads to a child in the dark and does the voices, a man whose face changes when he forgets to hold it, a man who is warm because warmth is what he is, not what he does. Gabriel looked at the portrait again, and his hands rose to cover his face. His shoulders shook, and Eliza understood that he was not weeping. He was trying not to. His voice was muffled behind his hands. "Give me a week. I need a week to forget you." Eliza's breath caught. "You do not need to forget me. You need to forget what your father told you about who you are allowed to be." Gabriel lowered his hands. His face was pale, his eyes red-rimmed, and he looked at her with an expression that was both desperate and defeated. "I cannot look at that portrait and believe it is true. Because if it is true, then I have been wrong for 13 years. And if I have been wrong, then I have wasted everything." "You have not wasted everything," Eliza said. "You have survived. And now you have a choice." He shook his head. "I need a week. Please." He left the studio without another word, and Eliza stood alone before the portrait, her hands trembling, her chest tight with the knowledge that she had just lost the commission and possibly destroyed the only honest work she had produced in 6 years. She reached out and pressed her hand flat against the wet surface of the canvas, leaving her fingerprint on the painted jaw. Her mark, her truth, her choice. Day one began with silence. Gabriel did not come to the studio. Eliza waited until noon, then returned to her cottage and sat at her work table, staring at the blank canvas she had prepared for her next commission, a portrait of Mrs. Pemberton's daughter, a safe and flattering piece that would pay for the pigments she owed, and nothing more. She did not paint Mrs. Pemberton's daughter. Instead, she mixed cerulean and began a self-portrait, the first she had attempted in 6 years, since the day the merchant's wife had wept and refused to pay. The woman who emerged on the canvas had tired eyes and steady hands, and the expression of someone who had chosen truth yesterday and did not yet know what it would cost. At Weybourne Hall, Mr. Carstairs arrived. He was a fashionable London portraitist, 60 years old, with a reputation for painting dukes exactly as their galleries required. He had been commissioned to paint Gabriel 3 years earlier, but illness had delayed the work, and the commission had passed to Eliza instead. Now, recovered and informed by gallery connections that a village painter had taken his place, Carstairs had come to assess the situation, where he entered the studio without knocking and examined Eliza's half-finished portrait with the critical eye of a man who had been painting correct faces for 30 years. His tone was neutral, technically accomplished, but tonally inappropriate for a ducal gallery. The expression is unguarded. One paints a duke as his station requires, not as a moment's lapse suggests. He set up his own easel beside Eliza's and began a preparatory sketch. Gabriel's face arranged, correct, cold. The 6th Duke's portrait reproduced for a 7th generation. Gabriel spent day one in the estate office, managing correspondence and tenant reports with the same precision he had applied to every task since his father's death. At 4 o'clock, he walked the east corridor and passed the studio. Through the open door, he saw Carstairs' sketch on the easel, his own face, arranged and dead, identical to the portraits of his father and grandfather and every Ashworth who had performed correctness for 200 years. He stared at the sketch for a full minute, then turned and walked to the library. That night, Gabriel lay in bed and tried to sleep. But the portrait lived behind his eyelids, his own face, warm and unguarded, the face Eliza had painted after watching him for 47 minutes every sitting until his performance dissolved and the truth arrived. He saw Rose's blue-stained fingers. He heard her voice. "You did the voices." He felt the ghost of Eliza's hand on his jaw, tilting his face into the light, telling him that the warmth was not something he did, but something he stopped preventing. He reached for the edge of the bed, seeking the body that was not there. And for the first time in 13 years, the emptiness had a shape. It was the shape of a woman with paint on her hands, who had shown him his own face and refused to lie about what she saw. Dawn came cold and clear, and Gabriel dressed without calling for his valet. He walked to the stables, saddled his horse himself, and rode toward Hartwell village as the sky turned from black to gray to pale gold. 31 hours had passed since he left the studio. He had lasted 31 hours. Eliza was painting when she heard the hooves on the lane. She set down her brush, wiped her hands on her apron, and crossed to the door. She opened it and saw Gabriel standing 3 feet back from the threshold, his riding coat unbuttoned, his cravat missing, and his hair disordered as though he had ridden fast and hard and without care. He spoke first. "It has been 31 hours. "I can count, Your Grace," Eliza replied. "I told you I needed a week." She nodded. "You did?" "I lied," Gabriel said. "I do not need a week. I do not need a day. I need to understand why the portrait terrifies me. And I need you to explain it. Because I cannot sleep, and I cannot think, and I cannot forget what you painted or what you said, or the way your hand felt on my face when you were deciding what color to use." Eliza studied him. The painter's gaze, professional and sustained and intimate. "Come inside." Gabriel stepped into the cottage, and Eliza closed the door behind him. The room was small, cluttered with canvases and pigment jars and the smell of linseed oil. The self-portrait sat on the easel, nor half finished, and Gabriel looked at it for a long moment. He observed, "You are painting yourself." "I am trying," Eliza said. "It is harder than painting you." "Why?" "Because I know all my own lies," Eliza said, "and I do not know how to paint around them." She crossed to the window and positioned Gabriel in the northern light, the same light she used for every portrait. She took his face between her hands, the painter's grip, both palms against his jaw, tilting his head to catch the angle she needed. She instructed, "Stay still." Gabriel did not move. Eliza looked at him, her gaze moving across his face with the same sustained attention she had given him during the sittings. She watched his mouth, the set of his jaw, the tension in his neck. "There," she said. "Your mouth just shifted. You stopped holding it." "I do not feel any different," Gabriel said. "You will not feel it," Eliza said. "The warmth is not something you do. It is something you stop preventing. Your father taught you to prevent it, to hold your face in the arrangement that looked like duty and correctness and everything a duke is supposed to be. But when you are tired, or watching Rose, or standing in my cottage at dawn because you could not stay away, the muscles release and your face arrives. The face I painted, the face your mother wanted." Gabriel's hands rose and wrapped around her wrists, holding the painter's hands against his jaw. "Do not let go." "This is a professional assessment," Eliza said, but her voice was unsteady. "It's 5:30 in the morning and I am in your cottage," Gabriel said. "So that complicates the professional framing." He leaned forward, still held by her hands, and his mouth found hers. The kiss was slow and deliberate. The kiss of a man who had been performing restraint for 13 years and was now, with the same discipline, performing its opposite. Eliza held the portrait position, her palms on his jaw, and kissed him back from inside the professional grip, as though the boundary between studying his face and kissing it had dissolved entirely. When they separated, there were smudges of cerulean blue on Gabriel's jaw, paint from the self-portrait she had been working on when he arrived, her color on his skin. She observed, "You have paint on your face." He replied, "Leave it." Sittings resumed the next day. Gabriel unlocked the studio himself and waited by the window, and when Eliza arrived, they sat without being asked. But Carstairs remained. His preparatory sketch had advanced to a full composition. Gabriel arranged, correct, cold, the portrait the gallery expected and the family would recognize. 2 portraits of the same man, one warm, one correct. The gallery only had room for one. During the 7th sitting, Carstairs entered the studio and stood beside Eliza's easel, examining her work with the critical precision of a man who had spent 30 years painting what stations required. His tone was professional and without malice. "Miss Harding, your technique is genuinely gifted. But a ducal gallery is not a confessional. It is a record of the family standing. The expression you have captured is a private moment, or it does not belong on a public wall. A private moment sustained across every sitting for 3 weeks is not a moment, Mr. Carstairs," Eliza said. "It is the man." Carstairs replied, "It is the man as you see him. The gallery requires the man as his station sees him. I can have the composition corrected within a fortnight. The family will be pleased, and your fee will be honored in full as compensation for the preparatory work." Gabriel stood in the corridor outside the studio listening. He could see both portraits from where he stood. Eliza's warm face and Carstairs' cold one. 2 visions of himself that could not coexist in the same gallery. Rose appeared beside him, her fingers stained blue from the cerulean she had been mixing on the studio floor. She looked at both portraits, her expression serious. Uncle Gabriel, she said. Oh, Miss Harding's one looks like you. Mr. Carstairs' one looks like great-grandfather. Gabriel looked down at Rose, and his hand, without thought, without arrangement, settled on her shoulder. A touch. Gentle. Warm. He asked, which one should hang in the gallery? Rose considered the question with the solemnity of a child who understood that her answer mattered. The one that looks like you, because you are the one who is alive. 2 a.m. The east gallery was dark except for the single candelabra Gabriel carried as he walked the corridor, and the portrait in his arms. The canvas was heavy. Full-length, oak-framed, the weight of 3 weeks of observation and 9 seconds of truth multiplied across every sitting until it became permanent. He walked past the 4th Duke, the 5th, the 6th, his father's face, arranged and cold, when the face that had told him warmth was Thomas's inheritance, and duty was his. Gabriel stopped at the gap where his portrait should hang, the space that had been waiting for 3 years, since the day his mother died and made her final request, let someone paint you as you are. He could destroy the canvas. He could let Carstairs repaint it, let the gallery have the correct Duke it expected, let the performance continue for another generation. No one would know except Eliza, and Rose, and himself. Gabriel set the portrait down and took a piece of charcoal from his pocket. The same charcoal Eliza had used to sketch him at the Garden Folly. The charcoal she had left on the studio table, and he had taken without asking. He turned the portrait around and wrote on the back of the frame, now where the words would be hidden once the portrait hung. Thomas would have been the great Duke. You were the warm one. Mother, not his father's words. His mother's. The words she might have said if she had lived long enough to see the portrait. To see the warmth her younger son had locked away, because he believed it belonged to someone else. Gabriel lifted the portrait and hung it on the wall. He stepped back. His face, the warm one, the true one, looked back at him from the gallery. Among 6 generations of performed Ashworths, one face was unperformed. His. He turned and looked down the corridor. 2 Gabriels existed now, the one on the wall, open and warm, and the one standing in the gallery, still learning what it meant to stop preventing what he was. They looked at each other across the candlelit room, and Gabriel understood that the portrait was not a lie. It was a mirror that finally reflected accurately. He left the candelabra burning on the table beneath the portrait. Let the house see it by morning. Let the family see what their mother had asked for and what Eliza Harding had delivered. A Duke who looked like a man who looked alive. Morning came, and Eliza arrived at the studio at 9 o'clock to find it empty. Carstairs' easel remained, his correct portrait nearly finished, but the room held the stillness of a space that had been abandoned. Mrs. Lennox met Eliza in the corridor. The East Gallery, Miss Harding. His Grace wishes you to see something. Eliza walked the corridor slowly, her heart beating hard against her ribs. She passed the 4th Duke, the 5th, and the 6th, and then she saw it. Her portrait, hung among 6 generations of cold faces, the warm man in a corridor of performed correctness. She stood before it, and her hand rose instinctively, the painter's instinct to touch the surface, to check the varnish, to assess the light and the alignment. But she stopped before her fingers reached the canvas. It was no longer hers. It belonged to the gallery now. To the house, to every person who would walk this corridor and see a Duke who looked warm and wonder why he was the only one who did. Gabriel spoke from behind her. I hung it at 2 a.m. Eliza turned. Gabriel stood in the doorway, his face unguarded, his hands resting at his sides instead of gripping anything. She noted, the alignment is slightly off. He replied, I am not a professional. You carried a full-length portrait through a gallery in the dark. I could not sleep, Gabriel said, crossing the room to stand beside her. I have not been able to sleep since you painted my face and put it on a canvas and made it look like someone I was told I could not be. 31 hours I lasted. A week was never possible. A night was not possible. The title scene was my cottage, Eliza said. This is the 2nd act. This is the only act that matters, Gabriel said. I carried the portrait because Carstairs would have painted it over. I carried it because my mother asked for the truth, and my father spent 13 years ensuring no one delivered it. I carried it because a woman with paint on her hands showed me that the warmth was mine, and I was too frightened to claim it in daylight. So I claimed it in the dark, and I will claim it again now." He turned to face her fully, and Eliza saw that his face was doing the thing, the softening, the arrival, the warmth that he no longer prevented. "I do not need a week, Eliza," Gabriel said. "I did not need a day. I need every minute of every sitting for the rest of my life, because you are the only person who has ever looked at me long enough to see what my father told me was not there." Eliza studied him with a painter's gaze. Sustained, professional, intimate. "Your face is doing the thing," he acknowledged. "I know." Minute 47. "Minute 1, Gabriel said. "It has been minute 1 since the cottage." Eliza crossed the gallery and took his face between her hands, the painter's grip, the position that had become a kiss in her cottage at dawn. "I will need to adjust the hanging. The light is wrong." He disagreed. "The light is perfect." "Your Grace, I have been studying light for 26 years, Eliza said. "It is wrong." "Then fix the light," Gabriel said. "Fix everything. Stay and fix the light." Eliza's hands remained on his jaw, and she looked at him the way she had looked at him during every sitting, watching his face until it told the truth. "I will stay. But not to fix the light, to paint Rose. And after Rose, whoever else in this house needs to be seen." Gabriel's hands rose and covered hers, pressing the painter's hands against his face the way he had during the 5th sitting. And 10 seconds of contact had felt like a confession neither of them could speak aloud. "Paint everyone," Gabriel said. "Paint the entire house. Paint me again if you want. Just stay." Eliza kissed him in the gallery, beneath the portrait she had painted, and the kiss was slow and certain and witnessed by 6 generations of Ashworths who had never been painted as they were. Spring arrived, and the light in the east gallery shifted as the days lengthened. Eliza adjusted the hanging of Gabriel's portrait, moving it 3 inches east so the morning sun would catch the warmth in his painted eyes. She had been right about the light. She was always right about the light. Visitors to Weybourne Hall paused before the portrait, studying the face that looked so different from the others in the corridor. Women from the county remarked that the Duke looked as though he were about to speak, as though the paint had captured him mid-breath, mid-thought, mid-feeling. To them, the portrait was a curiosity. To Gabriel, then it was a mirror that finally reflected accurately. Rose's portrait was nearly finished by summer. Eliza had painted her mixing cerulean, her fingers stained blue, her expression serious and intent. Gabriel had asked where it would hang, and Eliza had told him, beside his in the gallery, where Rose belonged. The cottage in Hartwell Village became Eliza's permanent studio. New commissions arrived from women who had seen the Weybourne portrait and said, "Paint me as I am." Eliza painted them honestly, and none of them wept. Some of them smiled. Some of them looked at their own faces and said, "Yes, that is exactly right." Gabriel arrived at the cottage every afternoon. He sat in the wooden chair that was too small for a duke. And he watched Eliza work with the same sustained attention she'd given him during the sittings. Rose mixed pigments on the floor, her fingers perpetually blue, her chatter filling the room with the sound of a child who had been seen and claimed and loved. On the cottage wall, the moonlight sketch hung in a simple frame, the charcoal drawing Eliza had made at the garden folly before Gabriel knew she was watching. He touched the frame every time he entered the cottage, a ritual that had become as natural as breathing, as necessary as the light. One afternoon, Eliza looked up from the canvas where she was painting a merchant's wife, as she was. 45, tired, beautiful in ways the mirror had never shown her. "Your face is doing the thing again." Gabriel replied, "I have stopped preventing it." Eliza set down her brush and crossed to where he sat. She took his hand across the work table, and their fingers interlocked. Paint-stained, the cerulean and umber and the warmth of skin that had stopped performing and started arriving. The cottage door was open. The light was honest. In the east gallery at Weybourne Hall, one warm face hung among 6 cold ones, and on the back of its frame, hidden where no one would read it for 100 years, a message written in charcoal, in the voice of a mother who had asked for truth by the son who had finally delivered it. Everything arrived. The gallery at midnight. Gabriel Ashworth, Duke of Weybourne, stands before a portrait, candlelight casting shadows across 6 generations of cold Ashworth faces. The portrait shows a man who looks warm, eyes tender, mouth unguarded, hands open. The man standing before it looks at the painted face with an expression the audience now understands completely. Not grief, not surrender, Recognition? A man seeing himself for the first time, painted by a woman who refused to look away, who watched his face for 47 minutes until it told the truth, who put cerulean on his jaw and warmth on canvas and showed him that the correct Duke was a costume and the warm man was always underneath. The candelabra burns. The gallery waits. And in a cottage 3 miles away, a woman with paint on her hands sleeps in a bed where a Duke will arrive at dawn. Because he no longer needs a week to forget her. He needs every minute of every sitting for the rest of his life. Everything arrived.